Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement 2. On today's video, it's a sort of super mini mail call, but we're actually doing a wrap up from VCF Midwest. And last week there was part 1, or I think it was an hour and a half. I went through a whole bunch of stuff, but we have more things to look at. And I don't think I'm even going to get through all of these today, because some of these are going to require a dedicated video just on their own. So the first item we're going to look at today, and possibly the only item, is this thing right here. I can open up the anti-static bag. So what this is an adapter for the Mac SE30, and this comes from CayMac Vintage, and allows you to basically power up your SE30 motherboard. This plugs into it, this module here, and allows you to power it up from an ATX power supply, so specifically something just like this. I have this ready here. This is a Pico ATX power supply, so that connects up there. And then for video output, you can hook up HDMI to this Raspberry Pi Zero, which is basically just an RGB to HDMI integrated right into the board here. And with something like this, it allows you to take your SE30 motherboard and put it into a case like this one that a local friend of mine made that can allow you to turn your SE30 into a little desktop computer. The SE30, of course, is a compact Macintosh. It's portable and everything, but it has a little built-in CRT. And maybe you want to turn your Mac SE30 into something like a little desktop computer that's pretty fast for an old 68,000 base Macintosh. In fact, while I was at VCF Midwest, and I didn't take any pictures of this unfortunately, there were several people who had pretty awesome 3D printed cases that looked like miniature Macintosh 2SIs, and essentially had something just like this, or it actually had this inside, plus the SE30 motherboard in a case that had the styling and everything of the Macintoshes of the day, but of course, it was a lot smaller. It's not just about using cases like this, but it's actually about bench testing the Macintosh SEs. And right now, when I want to bench test an SE motherboard without the whole high voltage power supply and stuff sort of sitting off to the side, I have to use one of those open source vintage ATX to vintage computer adapters that I've shown on the channel plenty of times before. Now for me, what's useful about this is it makes it really easy for me to bench test motherboards and also work on them if I'm going to be doing any repairs. I always like to capture the video, which means I have to plug in my RGB to HDMI, which I keep on the bench all the time, but I have to come up with a little adapter harness to take the video signals that normally come off the motherboard through this connector here and feed them into the RGB to HDMI. Not to mention then I have to come up with a way to power them, and I think there is one of those vintage ATX to vintage computer adapters floating around out there that does work with the Mac SE and SE30, but it's not really designed for like this purpose to create a little desktop computer. It's more designed to replace the power supply that's in the Mac SE and SE30 when those sometimes go bad. So what it does is it will power up the motherboard and it will power up the analog board that drives the CRT. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison. If we grab a Mac SE30 motherboard, here's one that I've recapped in the past. This should, I think it goes on, let's see here. I see there's a little hole in the board there for the speaker plug. So you would feed the speaker cable through there, plug it into the motherboard, and then you could plug this then down onto the connector like so. It doesn't cover up anything important on the motherboard. Like I said, you can get to the speaker connector, and with the ATX power supply connected up here, let's just do that. That barely sticks out at all and actually still gives you access to your PDS slot. And I think what some people were doing there is they have a right angle PDS slot adapter, which will allow you to install accelerator cards and video cards and things for your SE30 above the motherboard right here. And it will hover above the power supply RGB to HDMI adapter. And with a combination of both of these, you can actually run a dual screen setup with a monochrome external screen that's replicating what you would normally have internal to your Mac. And then you're going to have the video card and the accelerator stuff that's on this PDS slot that will be hovering above the entire system. The guys at CayMac Vintage have a whole bunch of different stuff to show off using this adapter and all sorts of other accessories for the Mac. In fact, it was last year when I went to VCF Midwest that I brought home some other awesome things, like some sims that they make that have blinky LEDs on them to help you diagnose your system. Like if it looks dead, you can actually see if it's executing code based on these LEDs. And there was another cool thing that plugged into the floppy drive connector on Macs that have it, and it will tell you if your voltage rails from your power supply are within spec. Now with these types of things, of course, you could just plug in a normal ATX power supply into this, you know, with a thick cable off to the side. But there's really no reason to do that because this motherboard doesn't take up a lot of power, and these Pico ATX power supplies would have no trouble powering up this entire Mac motherboard. Now what's cool about the SE30, and I'm not sure if you're super familiar with it, is that the processor, which is a 68030 running at 16 megahertz, actually has a full 32-bit data path to the entire rest of the system. So the RAM is fast because of that, and you have to install 4 of these 8-bit wide SIMs at a time, and you can have up to 128 megs of RAM on this thing, which is amazing considering this thing came out in the late 80s. In addition, what's cool about this system is the video memory, which are these two chips right here, does not share bandwidth with the main system memory, which is different than all the other classic Macintoshes, where the system memory is also used for display buffer. That means that any kind of graphics you have going on the motherboard graphics at least, are not going to be slowed down by access to RAM or vice versa. You also have a math code processor right here to help speed that up, which is kind of unusual. A lot of Apple Macintoshes that had 68030s didn't come with integrated math code processors, at least not the low-cost systems, including the Macintosh Classic 2, which is supposed to be like the successor to this system, and yeah, it lacked the math coprocessor that this system actually has. What also kind of stunk on the Classic 2, which made it worse than this system, is it could only support up to 10 megabytes of memory, while this thing can support up to 128. Although there's a caveat: if you have the stock ROM and you have 128 megabytes of RAM in this, the RAM check when you first power on the machine is so slow that you end up having this black screen for like a minute when you first turn it on before the system will actually begin to boot. It's half as long if you only have 64 megs of RAM on here, but there is a patched ROM, I think, available for maybe Big Mess of Wires. This is all off the top of my head here, that patches out that RAM test that allows the system to boot a lot faster. Now, I was kind of curious is if this adapter works with the regular SE motherboard. It actually says on here SE30, so it's like it's designed for the SE30 specifically. But these two motherboards are very similar. You can see the power connector isn't in exactly the same position, but it's nearly in the same spot. So let's see what happens if we try to connect this up. I guess one thing that might be different is the speaker connector here is in a little bit of a different position. But does this actually fit? It does. Now it covers up the floppy drive connector, and I guess that's probably one of the main issues with this. There might have been a variant of this for the regular SE. Obviously all you had to do is move this connector there, so just slide this down a little bit, and that would free up the floppy drive connector that is covered there, not to mention the speaker jack would be aligned correctly. But I think otherwise it does kind of work, and if you're not going to be using the floppy drive connector here, then you're okay. I can't remember off the top of my head which of these two floppy connectors is for drive 1. Macintosh SE supports 2 internal floppy drives. Worst case scenario though, if you have a machine with 1 internal drive and this is the drive 1 connector, you could cut some traces on the bottom of the board and probably rewire this one to become drive 1. Incidentally, this Mac SE motherboard, this exact motherboard, is the one that was in the Macintosh SE that I used as a kid. Yeah, my mother and my stepfather bought a Macintosh SE around 1987. They kind of used it for their business, but I ended up kind of appropriating the machine and using it even in my bedroom alongside my Apple II GS. So it was a little bit more of a professional machine. And then over the years, they actually just ended up holding on to it, and the whole machine still works. I think I did a little bit of repair on it, need a bit of retro bright, but otherwise still works perfectly. And this motherboard should be working perfectly as well. The reason why it's not inside that computer anymore though is because I used that external chassis to have or to hold a SE motherboard that has an accelerator on it. I made a video about that a while back. So that's still in there, and this is the actual one that was part of that machine. So if I ever want to restore it back to stock, so to speak, I'll put this back in there. Of course, it didn't have this CR2032 on here when I was a kid. I have since replaced that because I just didn't want the risk of that leaking all over the board and destroying it. So when it comes to the SE30 motherboards, I actually have 3 of these that I was given. They were in unknown condition, and I recapped them all. And I think today will be a good way to test this CayMac Vintage adapter board to see if all the SE30 motherboards are actually working. And in conjunction with the adapter board from CayMac Vintage, I'll be using the blue SCSI that Joe from Joe's Computer Museum sent me. And this is really easy when you're using these types of motherboards because you can just plug it right into the SCSI connector on here, and it is self-powered right off the termination power that comes through the SCSI bus connector. So you don't have to worry about plugging this into power, and that should hopefully boot this system right up. We just need to plug in a keyboard and a mouse into the ADB ports on here, and we have to plug in the HDMI output so we can capture the video. Okay, we're ready for testing. We have the HDMI connected up to the capture setup. I have the SD card from my RGB HDMI plugged into the system. I have a speaker just sitting here connected up. The blue SCSI is connected up under the speaker. Sorry, it's just out of camera view. I can't move the camera quite into view. And then we have the Pico ATX connected up. I think there's a circuit, maybe it's this chip right here, that turns on the ATX power supply as soon as you apply power, because normally there's a toggle switch. I don't have anything hooked up to these connectors because I don't have an external hard drive or anything like that, or a floppy drive for that matter, although floppy is powered from the connector here. That's fine. I'm using the blue SCSI. We don't need to worry about that stuff. And the mouse and keyboard is connected up to the back of the computer. So we're all ready to go. When I plug in the power, we should hear the bong out of the speaker here. All right, here we go. Hopefully nothing smokes. Well, I don't know. I heard a click out of that. I just have to switch the profile here because I think this is last used on my Apple IIc. So yes, okay. Well, this SE30 may not be working because it looks like we just have to have a checkerboard pattern here. Let's hit the reset button on the side of the Mac. Oh, well, we got a chime there. That is odd that it didn't just start automatically. I thought after I recapped these Mac SE30s, I did test them, but I didn't mark them whether they were tested or not. And okay, well, it's working. Let's see how much RAM we have on this one. 32 megabytes of RAM. That's a pretty nice amount of memory on this one. Cool. So one of the issues when you have the bad caps on these Macs is you don't have working sound, but sound is absolutely working fine. In case you're wondering, there's absolutely no way to change the resolution of the video output on the motherboard. It is not designed to run at anything except for just the internal Macintosh video resolution, which is like 512 by 356 or something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers, but that's it. That's what you're stuck with. Looks fine though, obviously, as you can see when you're viewing it on the HDMI output. I currently have it set to interpolate, so it's actually scaling the image, but you can have it do pixel perfect integer scaling, which means you'll have a border, but you'll have perfectly ultra sharp image. Why don't we shut down and let's power this thing off and see if it powers up again when I add power again. Okay, here we go. Well, that was very much a curiosity why that first time we just had that kind of checkerboard pattern without it actually working. But the RGB to HDMI works, and you can see how quickly the system boots up. There might be a configuration option on the RGB to HDMI as well to not show that text when it first boots up. I can't really remember, but it's a very flexible project with lots and lots of options. All right, well, anyhow, I know for sure that this motherboard works, so let's try the next one. I suppose one of the problems with this whole adapter board setup, though, is if you're trying to troubleshoot a motherboard, it may not be super easy to do that when the board is covering this entire section of the motherboard. And the SE30 has several caps in this area right here and all of these right here that leak really badly and can cause damage to the motherboard. So when I recap this, I obviously use these MLCC ceramic caps on here and that one electrolytic. And there's a cap over here and some more, and there's another one over there. But yeah, you have to check for damage when you take these caps off just because there can be a lot of issues. I washed these motherboards very thoroughly. They were pretty corroded and I scraped away any corrosion that had formed and now they look really, really good. So I just noticed here I was about to mark it, but there's already a check mark there to tell me that, that it does work. Okay. So why don't we try running this thing on the SE motherboard here and see if I can get the speaker plugged in first of all, and then see if this system can boot. So I think this is actually connected up, but one of the problems is it kind of rests on the speaker connection. Let's get this plugged in and I'll try to show you. So if we tilt this up like that, so you can kind of see that it's sort of resting on that speaker connection. It's not ideal, but if you were going to try to use one of these on an SE, I'd recommend just connecting the speaker somewhere else, or you're soldering the wires onto the two pins and having it run out from under here, and then it would probably be fine. Again, you still have the problem with the floppy connector though, and there's no real way to avoid that. The other thing to consider about the CayMac Vintage adapter here is the connector they're using that goes into the motherboard doesn't have the normal clip like this to hold it in place. Of course, it's good it doesn't, because how would you even get to that, right? You can't get your finger under there. But that means that this thing just comes off pretty easily. Now, in case you're wondering that this might be dangerous to plug this into an SE motherboard because it's not an SE30, you don't have to worry. And that's because the SE and the SE30 share the same power connector and power supply. They're interchangeable in the case, although not completely, because some of the structure inside the SE on some of the early ones, it doesn't accommodate the repositioned power connector that the SE30 has versus the SE, and it won't actually, well, you can't really plug the power connector in. But that in the later cases, the metal structure accommodates both types of motherboards. So I'm just checking to see if the battery holder is clearing, and it is, but just barely. So I just need to make sure to, just gonna stick this card in there. I just don't want to accidentally push down on this and have it short against the battery. Okay, let me plug in this power connector here and see what happens. So far, nothing bad. I don't have a speaker hooked up, so we're not going to hear a beep or anything. But are we going to get a video output? We are indeed. So it does work on the SE. Of course, there's no reason why it wouldn't. Exactly the same resolution, same everything. So video output quality is exactly the same. This machine, of course, only has 4 megabytes of RAM on it, and it's way slower. And there it is, booting up off the blue SCSI. It's pretty awesome. Yeah, I have a version of the system on here that is compatible with pretty much all the old black and white Macs like this. Let's see what version this was. I forgot, 6.1.7. I think I installed it fresh from the installer, so it supports the SE30, the SE, and I think the original Classic. I think this will not work on the Classic 2, and there's a trick to make this work, which basically when it boots up, it complains that it is not supported, and you hit the interrupt button on the side of the machine, which gives you like a programmer box that pops up, and you hit G, enter, which is go, and then it resumes booting, and it fully works. So there's literally no actual reason why it doesn't work. It's just some kind of fake software limitation that Apple put in place, so you couldn't use the System 6 on the S or the Classic 2. Ridiculous. All right, well, it works, and it's slow, just like a real SE is. And that was one thing when I used this computer back in the day, this exact motherboard. It used to frustrate me to no end, especially once you put System 7 on there. It was a dog. It ran so slowly. I'd say that if you are running any kind of 68,000 Macintosh that doesn't have an accelerator or doesn't have anything better than a 68,000, absolutely run System 6. Otherwise, it's a pretty slow and miserable experience. So I think what I'm going to do now is I'll just quickly test my other 2 SE30 motherboards, and then I'll just wrap this segment of the video up. I'll plug the adapter into the second SE30 motherboard, and this one doesn't work. I've tried power cycling it several times. You don't get an unhappy sound or anything like that, but we get an absolutely non-functional system with a little bit of dot pattern over on the edge as well. And the reset button and interrupt button, they don't have any effect whatsoever. What I'm curious about is if I release the SIM socket here for the ROMs, these are the ROMs here, if we just take those out, is there any difference at all with this system? Or is it not even executing code? Let's see what happens. I guess one of the negatives of this whole thing is it takes a while for the RGB to HDMI to boot up. And with my external one, when I'm hooked up through a cable, it doesn't do that. Right, so this looks very, very similar. I don't notice any difference whatsoever. Let me grab the third one, and if it's working, then I'll take the ROM out and we'll see if it has a similar behavior. All right, this one here has more damage on it than the other 2. Down in the cap area here, there's even a bodge wire that I had to install, it looks like. The fact that there's a bodge wire there kind of implies that this motherboard did work at some time. There was no tick mark on this one or the other one to indicate that I had tested them. But I don't think I would have put a bodge wire on there. Well, maybe I would have, just by examining the board when I was doing the recapping. Other thing that's interesting about this board is that the CPU is actually soldered on. It is not in a socket like on the other 2. Okay, I don't have the speaker hooked up, and I don't have the keyboard hooked up. I'm just going to try it on its own. Let's see what happens here. Interesting, it's doing the same thing the other one was doing. But the reset button on this one has an effect. But it's not a very measurable effect. I should measure the voltages on this Pico ATX. Could be a problem with it. All right, there's the 5-volt rail, 4.994. That certainly seems totally good. Don't think there's any issues. 12 volts looks totally fine as well. Minus 12 is fine. Minus 5 is whatever. It's not perfect, but who cares? That's not important for the operation of the computer. I don't know what these other signals are. These could be like sync signals or the 5-volt rail there. Spot on. And we're still just getting the same pattern that we saw on the first one, actually. I don't think it's the adapter. It's got to be something with the motherboards. I assume these have suffered some kind of damage that's happened like after I took those or recapped them. I'm going to go back to the first one here, the one that worked. It worked after that first try. I just want to see if it still works or we're still having the same problem. Could be excessive ripple, I suppose, on the power supply as well. We'll note in a moment here. No, this one's fine. Very odd. Very, very odd. Well, before I say those other two motherboards are bad, I'm going to plug in a full-size ATX power supply here just to double check. Okay, the whole setup's a bit precarious. This is the working motherboard. I'm going to turn on the power supply here. Power LEDs on. Okay, looks like we're good with this board. Next up is the bodged motherboard here. This is the one with the bodge wire on it. No. Okay, so I know it's not the power supply. And like I said, the reset button on this one does have an effect. Doesn't make it work. Interesting. I'm assuming that we wouldn't be hearing any kind of sound. Now, if there was a RAM problem, typically what happens is the ROM starts to load and then you get the triple tone. Oh, is that it? Pushing the reset a whole bunch of times made it work? Oh, you gotta be kidding me. What would cause that? What on earth would cause that? I mean, the other motherboard, the one that worked, did have that gray pattern when we first turned it on, and then it kind of worked after that. Now it just seems to work consistently. I wonder what's happening here exactly. Right. I'm going to switch back to the other power supply. It's just easier on the bench here. Just going to plug in the blue SCSI and the keyboard and mouse, because if this thing does decide to work now, then we can validate that it's actually running properly. Okay, power is being plugged in right now. This is the ROM from that second motherboard that wasn't working. Well, I didn't think this was going to be a Mac motherboard repair video, but you never know. Second channel videos are good sources for fodder for the main channel of things I'm going to be repairing at some point in the future. Well, it booted up and it's working. I can't explain what's happening here, not at all. Let's put the scope up there. There we are, booted up. We have only 8 megs of RAM. Well, what is happening here? I really don't get it. I guess we have yet another Adrian's Digital Basement It Fixed Itself thing here. This is frustrating. I just pushed reset a whole bunch of times and then it just started working. Let's power cycle it again. I mean, Mac SE30s run really cool. Nothing on this board is warmed up at all. Let's see if those caps here, these are electrolytics. Yep, those are totally cool to the touch. And it's like no warmth at all. Nothing on here is warm at all. Let's hook up the speaker. Let's just make sure the audio works on this thing. I'm going to be curious if this works. Nope. I think we're stuck again. Yeah, we are stuck. So I just pushed the reset a bunch of times. It just started working. And now we're back to not working again. Let's move this board around here. Bad connection? Nope. Let's try bending the board. How about that? Let's just flex it a little bit. I'm going to do it while I hit reset. No effect here. Okay, I just beat on the chips, and that time it worked. Is this just a problem with the lack of Deoxit? I got some Deoxit here. Let's deoxit these chips here and see if that makes any difference at all. Well, actually, I'm curious. If I take out the video ROM, which is this IC here, and let's plug the power in, what do we get? We get no video. Or do we? Nope. Okay, there we go. We have a system that's not working. Okay. Okay, deoxit in the video ROM socket. No bong. So we're still not working. Let's beat on these chips again. Hit the reset button. Okay, it's starting now. What if I let go? Okay, I moved the ROM socket, and now it's not booting. Let's move it this way, and now it's working. Okay, this might be a problem just in the ROM socket. So I'm going to take this out carefully because it can break, and this is a non-standard socket. And let's deoxit this. And what I'm going to do is just rub the contacts with a little bit of magic eraser here. Okay, now let's see what happens. Right away, we got a chime. So let's see if I can manipulate this to make it stop working. Nah, it seems pretty reliable now. Okay, so I guess the problem was just dodginess here in the socket. It's probably happening on the other one as well. I don't think that's the problem, though, with that middle board necessarily, because it was showing a weird pattern on the screen. So let's take this SIM socket out again, and I'll try this other ROM socket just for fun. If you plug in the system without the ROM socket, I think we're just going to have that exact pattern, which we saw last time. So this is the one I took out of the middle motherboard that appears totally dead. Okay, well, we're just kind of seeing what we saw before. The video memory just kind of retained what was in there last. It's not a working system there. It's just that I didn't leave it turned off long enough for the bits to decay. If I leave this, well, let's see how long we can leave this and we still see something there. And then I'll try this one here. I'm sure this one works. I think there's another fault on that other motherboard. Yeah, okay, same kind of thing. We can still see the mouse pointer under there. Maybe? Come on, go away. Funny, right? Okay, here we go. Let's pop in this one. Okay. You have to be very gentle. It's got plastic clips on it. And yeah, there we go. We got a chime immediately. So we know this one works. I'm just going to draw a tick mark on this one here. And I know that this motherboard is working. So we're going to do a tick mark there in the corner. Why don't we let this boot up, though? I don't think I let it do that, so we can see exactly how much memory it has. I bet you this has either, well, it might have 8 megabytes. I think, oh, we did see this boot up. It was 8 megabytes. Yeah, okay. Cool. Well, sound is working. Everything works. It just had deoxit required for the ROM socket. Okay, so for this one, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take all these pals out of the sockets just ever so slightly, and I'll push them back in. I won't put deoxit. I won't go that far. But the act of just sort of tilting them out, I'm not going to pull them out all the way even, just the act of sort of tilting them out of the sockets and then pushing them back in helps make a new connection or a better connection inside the socket. And that one as well. There we go. And we'll do the video ROM as well. Now the CPU is socketed on this one, so it could be a problem with that as well. I might need to kind of pop that out, put it back in. This thing has had deoxit on it. So we know this is good memory or ROM sim. And let's see what happens now. So I got no bong or dong coming out of the speaker. I just heard a click. Same problem. Okay, well, I'm thinking here, because the pattern is sort of interleaved white and then sort of detect the gray pattern we're supposed to see, reset button doesn't do anything at all. I'm wondering if it's a video memory problem, though. It almost feels like when the system doesn't initialize at all, when I take the ROM out, you just kind of get a gray pattern coming out of the motherboard. And with this one specifically, when the clock is running, we should be seeing all gray pattern like we saw in the other ones when we first powered them on before they were initializing. And that's just these PALs and whatever other custom chips on here reading out the video memory and displaying it. But looking at this, we're seeing, instead of all just that gray checkerboard pattern, we're getting these white stripes, which kind of makes me believe that maybe one of these chips is not working. I think they are 8 bits wide each. And what we're looking at here is one chip, then the other chip, one chip, the other chip. And these chips, when they first initialize, they should just have that gray pattern. That's obviously just what happens when they first get turned on. And it's not being read out correctly. And with this system just powered up and not really executing any code, this is all we get. Now I'm going to flex the board here. Watch those patterns. So the pattern we're seeing there, it kind of looks like binary counting. Now that's, by the way, just happening on its own. That wasn't coming from me flexing the board. It kind of comes and goes. It feels like some kind of binary counting signal is leaking into the circuit for the display, something like that, and it shouldn't. Wow, one thing that's really interesting, this EPROM is burning hot. Wow. That doesn't seem right at all. Let's pop this out of here. And let's just power the system up without that in there, just to see if there's any difference at all. I wonder if this thing died. It's a 2764, so it's just a normal chip. I can take one of the chips off the other one there and copy it. Well, there's no visible difference here, but I don't know why this chip is burning hot. Like, wow. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna poke around the motherboard a little bit here. 4.95. Yeah, 4.95 as well. The other thing that's odd as well is this 6522 is burning hot as well. Those aren't. Those are fine. CPU, just warm. I mean, these aren't, I only ran it for a little while. They're fine. But this chip is super, super hot. And the thing about this one is really no capacitors in the general vicinity, right? There's just that one that leaked. As a comparison, I grabbed one of the working ones here. Oh, you know what? We should deoxit this as well, because this, remember, when we first turned it on, it didn't start as well. So I'll do a little deoxit on this ROM socket. Yeah, the problem is with these ROMs is these aren't gold plated and they get a little crusty just from age. All right, so what I want to do is power this up, and I just want to compare what the heat of that chip is like. That does not seem right. All right, here we go. And are we booted? There we are. We are booted. What's happening here? No. It's cold to the touch. And how about the ROM here? Totally cold to the touch. Feels like there's something very shorted on maybe the data bus or the address bus on that other motherboard, and that's causing those chips to get really, really hot. I mean, no, just not even warm at all. Huh. All right, well, let's check the heat of these. Oh, they're warming up. Okay, so the PALs are warming up. They're not hot, they're not burning by any means, but they're warm. Oh yeah, they're definitely warm. EPROM, cold. 6522 up here, totally cold to the touch. So the fact that that's burning hot, maybe that chip is shorted or gone bad or something. One thing we can do is let's just swap out the video ROM on this one with the one that was burning hot on the other motherboard, because I am curious here. Guess while we're at it, we'll deoxit this socket here. May as well. Okay, so this was the burning hot ROM. It was on the other motherboard. Here we go. What's going to happen? System's not running. So that chip might be bad. Yeah, that's interesting. Let's just reset the system here. It's getting warm too, very quickly. Yep. Okay. So I guess that's a bad ROM. No problem, right? I can just make another one. Luckily, it's just a standard EPROM pinout too. But that's curious. Okay, Put that back in. Let's hope that it didn't break this motherboard. That would suck if that was the case. No, it's working fine. Okay, well, confirmed. We have one bad chip here. So I'm going to draw an X on that. This is troubleshooting for a future repair on the other motherboard, I guess. Yes, it is. Yep, running cool. Running cool. All right, well, what I want to do is, since this motherboard is good, I'm going to go back to this bad one without the ROM in there. And maybe what I'll do is I'll just make a new ROM. I'm afraid to try that one in here. What if it kills it? But I do want to see if this 6522 here heats up very quickly when I power this board up. Obviously, this thing's not going to do anything without the ROM installed in there. But let's see if that ROM being shorted was somehow killing this 6522 over here. Now, by the way, the 6522s over here, these are CIAs, I think, VIAs, I can't remember. You know what? It's not heating up now. It's very interesting. All right, well, what I need to do is take some notes here about a future repair. So I guess if you're watching this, well, let me know what you think, because we obviously have some issues here. I haven't really done any repairs on an SE30 before, and I haven't looked at the schematics or anything. But if we get my little note card here, so let's say bad video ROM. We know this for sure. UK12 gets very hot. You know, it's not doing it now. It seemed to only do it when that was in there, I guess. How about the warmth of anything else? You know, these pals are pretty warm, but you know, maybe after several minutes of running, that's just what happens. So UK12 6522 got hot. Put Deoxit on ROM socket. Yeah, 6522, it is not burning hot any longer. It is just very mildly warm, similar to its neighbor here. So these must somehow be on the same bus, and maybe this chip kind of went short, and that's what killed things on this motherboard. The first time I powered this up, I swear I saw the checkerboard pattern, and then it all went downhill from there. So I have a feeling that this, whatever's on the data bus with this ROM chip, probably damaged more parts of this motherboard. That's my assumption here. And I think we are seeing a symptom of it right now with those stripes. So I'm going to write down vertical white stripes as one of the symptoms. I wonder if this is on the same data bus as one of these two chips, and maybe that chip there, and it has actually damaged one of these and damaged that. And the problem is the 6522s are necessary for the kind of remapping of the ROMs into a different place of memory to get the CPU to start executing code. So if one of these has gone bad, potentially if it's the right one that's used for that remapping of the ROM space, then that would prevent the system from booting altogether as well. Right, for fun, I installed a new EPROM. I copied it off one of the other motherboards and put a new 2764 in here. I haven't powered this thing up yet, but what I started doing is taking a look at the data lines on this chip here, the EPROM, and looking to see what they were on. Now, I put silver dots on things that I found it on, and it wasn't an extensive or exhaustive search, but I mean, the Mathco processor, we can assume the processor, these two chips, these chips, that RAM chip, not this one, but that one, this SIM here, and probably this SIM as well. So those two, not going to be these. And yeah, that's a lot of things. And the fact is, I'm thinking we're going to be stuck at 5 volts on all the data lines on this chip. So 8 bits, that is. It can't be the memory modules. There's no way all of these chips would go bad. We might have one that went bad that could kill the data bus. There's got to be an IC on here that has failed. Now, I did poke around like these chips here and these chips and those, and they don't seem to be on that particular data bus, or at least on the 8 bits that this is shared with. It could be on some of the other parts of the motherboard or address bus and stuff like that. That's not helpful. That's a lot of chips. So this will be an interesting troubleshooting repair. We can just test to see what happens now with that new EPROM in there, see if it kills it or gets really warm or whatever. But yeah, absolutely, the other one was totally dead, at least after being in this thing when it got powered up, I guess. Now keep in mind, by the way, I haven't looked at the schematics at all. This is just kind of going off of what I think I know about this particular system, but I don't really know. I'm just sort of guessing based on my experience with other 16-bit or 32-bit systems like this. Let's power this on. We're getting no signs of life. Checking for hot things. And we are looking exactly the same. No reset. And well, at least the ROM chip is not getting hot. Yeah, nothing seems to be getting hot. Oh, do you see that? How it changed there when I pushed on it in that one spot? Interesting. The fact that reset doesn't work is a bit suspicious. The reset circuit is driven by one of the sound chips. I think they're underneath here. There's two Sony sound chips. I think this thing has stereo sound. I don't think those are on the data bus, at least on the 8-bit that the EPROM is on. But at least things aren't getting burning hot. All right, I think I'm going to end the troubleshooting of this SE30 motherboard right here. I have my notes for the future when it gets time to actually troubleshoot this. Obviously, I'm going to have to do some scoping on this thing, and maybe, just maybe, this is going to be a good use case for the current tracer. We have a whole bunch of things on that data bus, and obviously something is causing it to get stuck. And we're going to need to try to figure out which chip it is on here. And yeah, there's quite a number of chips on here that are potential culprits. So I'm going to put this motherboard over in my pile of broken stuff over there for a future repair. And for now, that was the CayMac Vintage SE30 video output power supply adapter, cool little board. This thing is pretty awesome. I think my only complaint, and this has nothing to do with its intended use case, which is to install these motherboards inside a little small desktop case, is that obviously for me, plugging this in here, it covers up a bunch of the motherboard, and especially this area right here, which I'm obviously going to need access to while I troubleshoot this thing. So I'm going to have to figure out some way to connect up a power supply to this that doesn't involve covering up the motherboard so I can probe it with the oscilloscope when it's time for troubleshooting. But for its intended use case of going in a desktop case with the motherboard, it's freaking awesome, and I love creative projects like this. And well, if you want one of these, I'll put a link in the description below to where you can pick one of these up. And of course, it goes without saying, thanks very much to CayMac Vintage for giving me one of these while I was at VCF so I could test it out and show all of you. All right, on to the next thing. I think I got very detoured there troubleshooting this bad motherboard. So I think we really only have time for one small thing before I have to end this video, and then we'll pick up with another video of stuff I brought home from VCF. We're on to the next part here. You can tell it's a different day, wardrobe change. But you might notice the lighting is a little weird on the bench here, and that's because something fundamentally has changed down here on the bench. I've gone ahead and I've replaced the mat that was on my bench, which was all kind of beat up and you had stains and stuff, with another blue ESD mat. An actual, honest to goodness, proper industrial quality lab grade mat. Now you may notice this thing is already marred up a little bit. There's some holes here and some scuffs and marks. Yes, this is not brand new. This was given to me when it was saved from going into the trash. It was about to be thrown away, and someone grabbed it and thought that, well, I could use it. And over the last weekend, I took everything off my bench and replaced, well, I put this over the entire surface of the desk I work at here. But it has this weird effect of creating this blue glow on my face here, and that's because I have a light that's mounted behind this camera here that shines down on the bench, and of course that's reflecting a lot of the blue light onto my face. And I don't know what I think about that. It kind of ruins the, not going to say color balance, because these cameras all use fixed color balance, so it's unaffected by the blue mat. But I can tell now that that reflected light off the desk and the kind of light colored mat that I had gave my face a much more lit appearance than it does now. Now it's just kind of shadowy. And I guess if anything, I'm gonna need to get some kind of a front light or something, like a ring light maybe to go around this camera that I'm using here. I'm a real vlogger now, you know, that kind of thing. Which I really don't want to do. I don't like having like a bright light shining right into my eyes, especially if I'm like doing recording and stuff. But on the other hand, this looks pretty terrible. So let me know your thoughts on the way the lighting looks here. Obviously it's going to vary a little bit depending on what shirt I'm wearing because the exposure on the camera changes, but I don't exactly love it. I know I'm not going to be changing out this mat. I like this mat a lot, and I don't want to replace it. These types of mats are quite expensive, so I don't feel like buying a brand new one, considering I have one that's in perfect, well, working order, maybe a little scuffed up, but I don't mind that at all. But yeah, the reflected light from this onto my face, just doesn't look so great. Anyhow, well, let's go on to the final item I wanted to talk about on this episode that was given to me at VCF Midwest, and it was this Sony WatchCam. Not Watchman, as in a little portable black and white television, but a WatchCam. Now, I was just checking the spreadsheet where I keep track of everything that I was given at VCF Midwest and all the mail call items and things like that, and I put the name of the person that gave it to me, and I don't have the name of the person that gave this to me. So I'm sure you're watching right now. I just want to say thank you very much, and I don't remember if we even got a picture together. If we did, if you could just go ahead and email that to me. Unfortunately, on Saturday, there were so many people talking to me that my brain was kind of overwhelmed a little bit. And I just had dinner last night with someone that lives here in town that was actually at the show, and I vaguely remember talking to them in person at the show, and I was like last night, hey, we did see each other at the show, right? Yes. That's how busy it was at the show. I just really couldn't keep up. So yeah, sorry about not having your name on this, but let's take a look at this little Sony WatchCam. So if we pop this open, this really mint condition little case here, you can see this is a Sony Watchman, as in a CRT television, black and white, that Sony sold for consumers to watch television when they were out and about. Like you're in a bar and you want to watch the baseball game or whatever, and it had a little telescoping antenna. Well, what this one is specifically, and let's take it out of this little case here, which I don't know if it's reproduction, but it's absolutely in perfect condition. Velcro here. Oh, this is a little sunshade for it. Look at that. I didn't even realize that. I hadn't really looked at this since I got home. Anyhow, if we take this out of the case, all this is, oh, there's a connector on the side here. I gotta kind of get it over this. There we go. So there it is. It's a little Sony television, but the difference with this one is it has a BNC video input plus 3.5 millimeter audio input on here, and it does not contain a built-in tuner. So I think the general idea was with this monitor was that it was compatible with both 50 and 60 hertz video signals. It is black and white, so it's not PAL or NTSC. It's EIA or CCIR, which is the 50-60 hertz thing. And the idea was that, well, before we had portable monitors to plug into cameras, this was supposed to be combined with a professional video camera. Like say you were on a shoot and you wanted to have someone monitoring what was being recorded by the camera. Well, the person who was actually operating the camera probably had a little mini CRT they could look through a viewfinder to see. But say there was an extra person there and they wanted to watch what was actually being recorded, well, they could theoretically do so on this. And using this little shade or sunshade that was on here, they would be able to see this a lot better. Now, one thing I'm noticing about this particular set is that the phosphor appears to be a lot darker than the consumer versions. Here are two Sony Watchmans. Yep, they are two identical models. I don't exactly remember, but I think one of these two consumer Watchmans here, model number FD10A, I did a repair on, I don't know, one main channel, second channel, I don't quite remember anymore. I think I tried to fix some geometry issues by replacing a couple caps. And then a viewer sent in another one, so I ended up having two of the identical models here. I think the one that I worked on, I ended up breaking the band switch. So that's this one over here, obviously. I ended up just hard coding it to VHF, if I recall, because it's not like we're receiving any UHF, VHF any longer. But we can see here December 1991 for that one. And this other one here, which does not have a broken band switch, is November 1987. So these were made for a good number of years, and that's because LCD TVs really hadn't come to the market yet, and they just were starting to around the time of these, and they were horrible quality. On the other hand, these offered really quite good image quality for what they were, and you can tell that these are CRTs, and that is the phosphor, and the electron beam comes from this part of the set up towards here. There's a deflection yoke right there, and it scans across the phosphor there. So you're actually looking through the electron beam as it hits the phosphor on that curved backing there. Now, it's interesting, like I said about this one, is look how much dimmer this looks. So I don't know if there's like a filter on the front or there's just something different about it. I'm assuming they did that to improve the contrast. you can clearly see that under the bench light here, this white phosphor is going to offer absolutely horrible contrast ratio. Essentially, when it's not being lit up, that's supposed to be the black color of the video image, and yet look how white that is. And I mean, to my eyes, it's maybe not quite as white as it looks in the camera, but it's still very, very light. Now let's take a look at the side of this thing. So all we have is a power switch, a volume switch, looks like a hole here for a lanyard. I don't quite know what this is all about. It's almost like you could pop the front off, but this might be something that lines up with this little case or something like that. I'm not 100% sure. On this side, we also have some grooves here. There is the video input. I'll flip it around so it's the right way around. Video input, earphone. So this is an audio output actually, and there's the audio input. And then we have DC, is that 6 volts input. And we have the remnants of some kind of a label. The battery compartment here, let's just open that up. I'm assuming we have 4 of these batteries. Yep, there's one hidden under there. Looks like we have a spot here for an extra stand. And now that I think about it, these ones don't have the stand. And I usually just like tilt up the antenna there. That kind of creates a little bit of a stand. But I had another one of these and I can't find it right now. It was a larger screen than these two. Don't think it was as big as this, but it was something in between these two. And it had a little plastic thing you could stick in here, and that actually was hung off the little lanyard holder there. So it would just sort of hang loose and you could stick it into there and then you could tilt the monitor up like so. The label we have on the back, flat display monitor, FDM 030. 6 volts, 2.3 watts. Yep, quite a lot of power used to run this thing. Doesn't have a year on here that I can see. Now, Sony did sell some of these Watchmens, the consumer ones with the tuner built in, that actually had video input as well. And the larger one that I have that I can't find right now has that. It has a 3.5mm jack, which I think has mono audio and video on it. And you have a switch on the side to switch between the 2 tuner inputs, and then you have the video input. I'm noticing on these smaller ones, there's an earphone jack, but there isn't even a DC input on them. So it looks like on this one, I actually added wires here so that I could connect it up to a power supply. Let's power this one up here, the one that I broke the switch on. Let's just see if it still actually works. We have 6 volts going into it there. They're static. Do we even have an image? I literally see nothing. So whatever repair I had done to this seemingly made it worse. Oh, wait a second. Oh, there's audio only mode and video mode. Ah, there it is. All right, so we have a working image still. So I didn't actually break it. Okay, so I went ahead and hooked up my Agile modulator, and it turns out this thing is stuck actually on UHF, and I set the modulator to channel 15 right now, and I have the test pattern generator going into it, and there it is. It's hard to see because I gotta cover the screen with my hand, but yeah, we're getting a good image. Let's switch to a different test pattern here. That's just very washed out, but that's actually it there. That's what we should be seeing. Pattern, there it is. There are color bars. The bar you see right there, I don't see with my own eyes. That's just the camera phase. But yeah, the geometry looks pretty good on this thing, actually. I have to say, I don't see any issues. I mean, it's, you know, it's not great. It's pretty typical. I don't think these things ever really had very good geometry. So we'll compare this one directly to this one right here, the WatchCam. Oh, you know what? Maybe this is a good opportunity to test this one out. I'm not sure I ever have. Okay, let's see if this thing works. TV. I think this thing is faulty. I see nothing. Let's switch it to UHF. Ah, UHF's working though. Let's see. There it is. Dare I say the geometry is better on this one than the other set. That bar at the bottom is simply the camera blanking. It's not really visible to my eyes. It's funny, it's sort of similar how it's stretched out a bit over on the side, but it looks pretty good. I kind of recall on this one, before I repaired it, there was some fold over going on with it, like, or maybe the image wasn't taking up the whole screen. I don't quite remember. But that looks pretty good. Yeah, okay. So, oh, yeah, I think the controls need a little Deoxit on this thing. No, but this one looks good. Okay, so both of these little guys are working. I have to say, these Sonys are pretty reliable. Haven't really had a ton of issues with them over the years. Other than, I think the problem with this one is just a couple of the caps were open. Now, working on these is extremely fiddly. They're very condensed in there. There's a bunch of different boards and stuff all squished together. And I think that's how I ended up breaking this switch here. I should write on here that this is UHF only, just for my future reference. So if I ever test this, UHF only. All right, let's try this one out. I know this one works because we tested it at the show. Interesting is all the batteries go in the exact same orientation with the positive facing the top here. Now with this little set, I was given this cable, this custom-made cable. So BNC jack plus a 3.5 millimeter for audio input here that goes in the top, and a DIN connector to go into the Commodore 64, or VIC-20 really. So that's pretty cool, isn't it? That's how I was able to test this at the show, is I actually plugged it into the 64 that I had operating on my bench, and it absolutely worked. So let's take the RCA cable that's going into the Agile modulator. Ooh, does it reach over here? Just barely. And there it is, there's the image. So yeah, geometry, it's a little like, Let's switch over to the color bars there. I mean, we're getting good deflection top to bottom, but what could cause that? It's almost like there's a magnet or something that's causing it. Now the image looks a little dark. Is there a brightness control on here? All we have is volume. Interesting that it's way dimmer looking than these other small sets were. They were substantially brighter. Huh. And I'm gonna go out and say that it's not the battery voltage that's causing that. If the battery voltage were low, we'd have deflection that was not complete, like the image would shrink. That wouldn't really control the brightness of the image. Is there a control for the brightness though? That just says stand. We have volume, power on, off. That's it. There's no, oh wait. Is that an adjustment right there? Let's give it a try. Just grab a little tool here. All right, I just have something small here. Aha, focus control. That's interesting. Let's switch this over to here so you could see better. Yep, that is absolutely, positively a focus control. Look at that. And yep, there's a proper setting, right? Kind of there. Looks about as sharp as it can get. Now, do we have any other hidden controls that I just didn't notice here? Nope, screws. Look at that. You can see where the antenna would go in on the plastic molding. That would be the telescoping antenna there. Pop out right there, but instead they just blanked it out. So that's focused, and we know that's adjusted. Is there something in the battery compartment that I missed? Let's take a look in here. I don't think there was. No. I can see the circuit board through there. Now, I guess part of me just wonders, is this just dim because it's using that much darker phosphor than these sets? Is that why it doesn't look as bright? Now for grins, I grabbed a little neodymium magnet here. These are just little tiny ones here. And let's see what that does to the geometry of this thing. So you can move it around on the outside here. Oops, I stuck it on there on the top. That's not where I want to leave that. I got stuck to the little lanyard holder. Oh no, it's really stuck. There we go. Well, you can see moving around the top edge here. It doesn't have a huge effect, but definitely down here it will. That's where the deflection yoke is. So it's possible to correct that deflection issue. I'd need to open this thing and stick the magnet inside. Nothing I can really do seems to fix this curve down we're getting right there. I'm pretty sure that if we open this thing up, there will be a control at least to brighten the image up. As far as making the geometry get better though, there almost certainly aren't controls for that. And the only thing I can think to do is maybe there were some magnets around the yoke or something that fell off. Maybe this thing got dropped or something like that, that caused that curvature. The deflection on this seems fine. Horizontal and vertical deflection seems fine. The image is taking up the whole screen. It's just that weird curvature that's happening. So I'm curious if anyone watching has ever worked on these and happens to know how to correct for some of those issues. Opening this thing up, there are a million controls, at least if it's anything like these, lots of little pots and things like that. So that's why I said there would be something to fix the brightness. I do find it kind of unusual though that Sony did not offer an external brightness control for the Sony WatchCams, but I guess they didn't think that you needed to do that. Now, some of you watching might have remembered me showing off this little thing on the channel before. I bought this from AliExpress a number of years ago, and yep, it's another little flat CRT. It's just like the WatchCam and the WatchMans here, but obviously we have the biggest of all. I think this was used on maybe a apartment door phone, something like that. So we have the same flat CRT technology. Surely this was either made by Sony or maybe it was off license because the patent had run out, so then this was manufactured. But we have a glass front here. The electron beam comes from this part here, that's the neck, and it shoots through the deflection yoke, which is right here, and ends up sweeping across the CRT there. Obviously, we have also the light colored phosphor, I guess, for maximum brightness compared to the WatchCam here. And I did a video on this thing, and you can see all the different controls and stuff we have here. This was a really good, high-resolution, little flat CRT monitor. Anyhow, that's the Sony WatchCam used for professional use, and I guess if I'm ever on the road and I need to plug in my 64 to a little CRT, I can certainly do so. Although I'm also very lucky to have something like this, which is a little sharp 5-inch color CRT television. And obviously from a size perspective, this thing is far bigger. It's got a little carry handle on the top here. This can run on batteries, although it runs on D-cell batteries, although maybe this one doesn't. I think the battery pack maybe hooks onto the back here. But what's cool about this is it does have audio and video inputs on it. And I never made a video about this thing because it just works. There's no issues with this. But it's got a tuner on it. It's got the video inputs and it is in color. So if I ever want to use my Commodore 64 like an SX64, I can do it with this little television. Surely they have the same CRT inside actually as the SX64. Just we have a bit of a size difference. So that's probably why this thing was used a lot in the field for cameras and not so much these because they were so big. Anyhow, that's it for this episode of VCF Wrap Up. There are still more things that I brought back that just they're too much to talk about in a video, that this video is already way too long. I thought I was only going to talk about this for like a couple minutes, and I probably talked about it for 20. So we'll see in editing if I'm able to make this video not be as long as the last one. So I just want to say thank you very much to CayMac Vintage for giving me that Mac SE 30 adapter that we showed earlier in the video. And then thank you to the viewer who gave me this awesome little Watchman. It's going to go upstairs in my office with these other ones here. I just love these little Sony things. When I was a kid, I really lusted after having one of these, like back in the late 80s. When I saw these in magazines, I was like, oh, that's the coolest thing ever. Now that I have one, of course, the reality is the picture quality is not great. It'd be very difficult to actually get any kind of use on this. And I feel like the money I would have spent on this would have been a total waste. Anyhow, thanks again for these things. And thanks to everyone I met at the VCF Midwest conference. It was an absolute blast. As a reminder, if you managed to get a selfie of me at VCF Midwest and you hadn't already emailed it in to me, if you could just drop me a line with that, that would be most appreciated. There are a few more that I have included in this video that I didn't get in time for the last video. And I think that's going to be that. Huge thanks to all my supporters, the YouTube membership, and on Patreon. Their names are scrolling up the side of the screen here. I just started YouTube memberships. So if you are adverse to using Patreon and you want to use the YouTube because they already have your credit card number or whatever, you can now sign up as a YouTube member. I'd recommend you go do that on the main channel though, not on the second channel here. You can do it here as well, but all of the special behind the scenes stuff and things that I include for the supporters of the channel are going to be posted on the main channel community page for those members. That is going to be that. So thumbs up, all the usual YouTube junk, and stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.